In this video, we're going to be talking about monitoring. Now, one of the things that's important to keep in mind when it comes to using monitors in a music mixing situation is that there is a potential for many different acoustic problems. We can't just put speakers anywhere. We have to start using our ears a little bit more fine-tuned. Same thing goes with our sound system. We have to really be careful on what kind of speakers we're using, their placement in the room, and what is in the room is of big importance. There are many acoustic problems that could crop up. And one of those is if you put your speakers directly against the wall, there's a bass boost that happens. If you've ever tried that, some people might think it sounds cool. Hey, music sounds bassier when I put the speakers right up against the wall. Unfortunately, it gives us a false presentation of what's actually coming out of the speakers. So we think there's a lot of bass, but then whenever you put it in another sound system, a car, or an iPod, or something, then there's not a lot of bass. So it gives us a false impression. Corners of the room are even worse because think about it. You're putting your speakers, even if they're not directly up against the wall and they're touching the wall, if they're near the corners of the room, that's a point where bass frequencies in particular gravitate towards. They're large waveforms, and that's where they all converge. And so you get another sense of a lot of bass, and it's problematic to the sound. You don't get an accurate picture of what's coming out of the speaker. Also, asymmetry is a bad thing. So if you have one speaker directly against a wall, and then another one is 15 feet from the next wall, that's a problem because then one of the speakers has too much bass and then the other one doesn't have a lot of bass. And so that's a problem with imaging. And so you're going to think, even though you've put your kick drum or your bass instrument in the middle of the mix, it's going to always sound like you've panned it to one side or another. So we really need symmetry in our placement and to avoid different types of wall absorption, if we have any at all. If you're in a normal house that has drywall, it can work okay, but often you need some sort of absorptive materials, some sound absorption panels, kind of like the one that's seen the back of this slide right here, something like that. And they can run from anywhere from very inexpensive do-it-yourself project to being rather expensive, and calling out professional acoustic room designers to come out and help treat your room for any if there are too many reflections or too many frequencies that are building up or a buildup of a particular frequency. It really is an issue, and it's kind of a hard one to deal with. And in this picture, we see kind of a typical home studio situation. Notice the symmetry. There's symmetry everywhere. The desk is placed exactly in the middle of the room. If you were to measure from this end of the table to the wall, it would be the same distance as this end to this right here. And the placement of these panels on the side. These are, for perspective, these are 2 foot by 4 foot panels. And that's the common size, 2 foot by 4 foot panels. And they have a couple of different, and on the top as well. Notice that's symmetric, right? Symmetrical. Here's the center line of the desk, which is the center line of the room if you were to measure the width of the room. And that goes exactly in the middle. Even the lights are symmetrical. Pretty cool, right? And the wall over here, it's the same material. This is probably just painted drywall, same up here. And they've done this kind of cool wood paneling over here that just makes it a little bit different. And then there's like a light carpeting. And there's a couch, and everything behind it is not necessarily symmetrical. But it is important to note that right here, the desk, right? When the person is sitting at this desk, these speakers are at ear height. So you also have to measure the height of the speakers. And the normal way to do that is if you, first of all, choose a chair to sit in, one that's most comfortable. You're comfortable in it. You're not sitting too low or too high. Your back doesn't get sore after sitting in it for 5 minutes. And then if you get a tape measure and measure the height of your ear to the ground and whatever that measurement is, let's say it's 50 inches. And so what you want to do is you want to put your ear not aimed at the tweeter right here or aimed at the woofer. Because if you aim or if you put the height of the speaker towards favoring one of the two cones, then you'll get, if it's down here, you get kind of a bass and low, mid, heavy sense of the music. And if it's up here, it's too high. You're going to be mixing out of proportion. So generally, we would adjust the height of the speakers to where your ear would be about in the middle of these two speakers, the tweeter up here and the woofer. So that 50-inch measurement I gave you would put your ear about right here. Okay, now which monitors you would choose, that's a big topic. You kind of have to listen. It takes time. There are certain places where you can go to buy speakers and you can audition them. It's helpful to go and audition speakers with music that you know really well. And as you develop a sense of your music mixing ear training, and you get a bunch of reference mixes that you trust and that you know and you've studied for a long time, you know what to expect. And various genres really helps too. A good classical recording, a good jazz recording, a good pop recording. There are a lot of great brands, and it's a great time to be buying gear should you want to buy some more gear. A lot of the more expensive brands, or what were more expensive brands, have a little bit lower line that are a little bit cheaper, and they're very affordable. And not that I'm advocating you get into debt, but if you wanted to spend a little bit more, it definitely is worth it to spend in this area. This is better than just about anything you could buy for your studio, is to get a really good set of monitors. Okay. As I said, listen to them before you buy. You can read some reviews. It definitely helps to read some reviews. And yeah, go with some of the brands in general that some of the famous mix engineers get. But the top brands like Atom and Focal, they're very expensive. Though, as I said before, they do have a little bit more affordable ranges, as does a company like JBL, for example. Okay, now what would you listen for? You want to listen for an even frequency balance. Now, without a perspective of what that means, that's kind of hard to, it's hard to understand. It's hard to explain, first of all, because there really is no such thing as an even frequency balance. What that really means is that you want to make sure that speakers don't hype anything. So if you sit in front of a set of studio monitors for the first time, it can be a little unnerving. You hear a little bit more upper mid-range and high-end than you might be familiar with if you're used to listening on little computer speakers or a decent set of bookshelf speakers, which are typically bass-heavy and low-mid-heavy, and a little spike around the 12K area. Studio monitors don't have that, and that's what's meant by an even frequency balance. Nothing really jumps out based on the speaker design in and of itself. And the other thing that's important is to listen at different playback levels. So a really low level, like at a whisper, and then a little bit louder. These aren't meant to be played really loudly, but it's definitely important to listen to them at different levels. And that's a normal thing we would do in a mixing scenario. We wouldn't just listen to a mix at the same volume the whole time. It's movable. We have it high sometimes, low other times, especially towards the end of a mix when we have to look at the fine details and level balances. And be sure there's enough output level without distortion. If you find yourself turning the volume up and it starts to get crackly and kind of funky sounding, move on. It's not worth the low price that's offered for it. Okay, now a basic monitoring setup. This is really important right here. You want to check the distance between the monitors the angles, and then how they're mounted. You might not be able to get that exact speaker height for your ears based on the desk that you have. You might need to either purchase or to make your own speaker stands. That's what I've done. A lot of people do that. It's really inexpensive to go down to Lowe's if you have any decent woodworking skills or even metalworking skills, and just kind of compute the height that you would need and what you would need to make your own speaker stand, and any angle that you have to angle your speakers at. Again, you just factor that into your to your building of your speaker stands. Now, if you do purchase pre-made speaker stands, they have height adjustment, so you're pretty good to go, and that'll cover just about anything you need. And it might be worth it to not have to have a DIY project. The thing that's really important is that we want to create an equilateral listening triangle. So whatever width you have your speakers, in this example, it's 5 feet. For a long time, the normally recommended distance was 3 feet. So that's 36 inches. And so you have 3 feet width of your speakers, and then you would be sitting, 3 feet back, and of course in the middle. So it creates this equilateral triangle. It's more accurate to be at about 55 to 60 inches. I think that's about what I have in my home mixing studio. I think it's about 60 inches. That's actually intended to be the ideal. So that's what we have, right? That's why the 5 feet. But for years it was 3 feet, and you can get away with 3 feet. That's the point. The other point is with these kind of small monitors that we're talking about, and you've seen in the photos so far, you don't want to go farther than that, because then anything that's mono, which is playing back in the middle right here, the phantom center, right? It sounds like something's coming out of the middle when there's no speaker. That level will start to drop. And so your mixing, you'll have some problems with your mixing. For example, kick and snare and lead vocal. It'll seem like you'll never really be able to get it loud enough. And when you do, you take it back on other playback systems, and suddenly that's all you can hear is the lead vocal, and because of your monitoring situation. So I would say at least 3 feet width, and no more than 5 feet. 5 feet's the recommended. And where you would put your head, some people would sit in front of that equilateral triangle. So you just have to measure, get a tape measure, and you can mark it on the ground to see where it is. I prefer to have my head right here, so the speakers are aimed directly at my ear. Some people sit in front of it like this. Some people sit where these are exactly facing your ears. But again, notice these are kind of tilted inward. They're not facing straight out like this. They're tilted towards your head. And that's really important, because you create this sort of zone of monitoring. Very effective system. And you can get away with not a lot of room treatment, or none at all. And this really, really works well. Okay. Now there are sometimes, depending on the speaker, there are parameters that are on the speaker. We'll get to that in just a sec. As we said before, the position of the tweeters, make sure they're not the part that's facing directly at your ear. So again, you measure the height of the speaker in between the tweeter and the woofer, right in the middle. That's what should be pointing directly at your ear. And if it's sitting on a desk or a console, it shouldn't be, first of all. But if you have to, that's okay. Just make sure that you're not placing anything in front of it. So there shouldn't be anything between the speaker and your ear. So if you have a lamp, for example, on your desk, make sure the lamp is next to your speaker and not in front of the speaker at all. Okay. Some speakers, like these powered Yamahas, they have level controls where you can set a nominal level, and and they also have an EQ setting. So it's for room control. So if you have a scenario where no matter what, you have to have your speakers close to a wall, not touching, but close to a wall, there's a room control, and it'll dip the lower frequencies. In this case, below 500 hertz. It can dip it either from nothing or to 2 decibels or 4 decibels. And the same thing with the high frequencies. So if you have a room that doesn't have much treatment and there's too much high frequency, you can dip it a little bit. So you can tailor the sound just a little bit on some speakers. And these are kind of cool to have, a speaker with these kind of parameters to adjust. Okay. The most, I guess, historically common way of placing speakers is this way. This is how speakers had been set in major studios for decades. Imagine this being a mixing console, which they usually had these shelves on top. And they would have speakers set up in this orientation where it was laying on its side. Most of us would think that is, right? There's the woofers right here and the tweeters on the outside. You can lay your speakers down like this. In some scenarios, based on your desk or the size of your room, size of your speakers, you could do it this way. It's not really the modern preferred way, but you can do it. And of course, if these are oriented vertically, the woofer would be on the bottom, the tweeter would be on top. Now, it also raises a question, can we mix on headphones? Yes, you can. There are some disadvantages. There's fatigue. If you listen to it too loudly, it can hurt your ears, obviously. There can be, damage. If the headphones themselves have too hard of springs, it could hurt your head, right? So you can get a headache from this, especially with some of the cheaper headphones. If you spend a little bit more money, get the really nice ones, they're well designed, you can have them on for a long time before you get, some fatigue. You do get a false sense of the mix. Everything sounds really good through a set of nice sounding headphones. And it takes a while to get used to picking out the parts of the mix that are wrong on headphones. The first thing, I think the most obvious to learn, is reverb levels and effect levels. It could sound perfect on headphones. Then you take it on another system, a bookshelf system, or into a car, and suddenly all you hear is reverb. It's very difficult to mix things like that. You also have to keep in mind, you may have spent really, really good money on some super high quality headphones. Your audience won't be doing that. And the ones that are of decent quality and look really good and are a nice color aren't necessarily great headphones. More than likely, they're probably listening, if they're using headphones at all, they're probably listening through earbuds. And that's definitely a different perspective on the mix. And we use earbuds for reference. It's okay to use them for reference because that's what our audience will probably be listening on, but not for critical mixing. It's just for reference. Okay, now there are advantages. What's advantage about it is you can hear noises a little bit clearer. You can hear mistakes. You can hear tuning really well. And it does help for editing. For a long time, I edited on headphones because of that fact. And you can hear the reverb and you can hear delay trails. You can hear that detail really clear. That for some reason, a lot of desktop speakers or speaker systems, probably based on the environment, tend to not be heard as easily. So there are advantages to it. Plus, if you live with other people, you can't be mixing into the night. You could do a lot of work, the bulk of your work, on headphones. And even to this day, I like going back and forth. I like listening on headphones to really zero in on frequencies I need to affect on a certain instrument. If I need to set a high pass level or set a resonance filter. Headphones, to me, really get to the bottom of that super quickly. And there are some really famous mixing engineers that are they're advocates of headphones. Andrew Sheps is the first one that comes to mind. He's mixed Metallica, and many other acts. But he's mixed on headphones and a laptop for a long time, and with amazing results. Okay. How should you listen? Well, you listen loudly for the bottom. That is, to hear bass really well, you kind of have to turn it up. Bass frequencies take a lot of energy. And so to listen at low volume, you don't get a sense of the bass and the bottom of your mix. It has to be a little bit louder. And we'll talk about that level later, how loud you should listen to a mix. Quietly for balance. That's the reason why we need speakers that are able to sound good louder, sound good quieter. One of the best ways to listen for balance is to turn your speakers as low as they can possibly go, like you're straining to hear things from it. And what do you hear? Well, if all you hear is the hi-hat, then when you turn it up, that means the loudest thing in your mix is going to be the hi-hat. In most modern pop music or pop-oriented music, that includes Nashville style, the lead vocal is the loudest. So you turn that music down, you hear the vocal really loud. Vocal and snare, those are the two main things that you hear in modern pop music. And everything else just kind of has to fill it out creatively from there. Remember that high volume causes ear and physical fatigue. It can cause ear damage. You should also keep in mind that the human ear, has different frequency response at different levels. There's something called the Fletcher-Munson curve. And what that basically means is that around 90 decibels, and that's an important one to remember. That kind of goes back here where we're talking about loudly for the bottom, right? How loud to listen, and monitor level. How loud should I play it? The ear is the most flat. That is, it can process frequencies the most even at a 90 decibel level. That's pretty loud, actually. There are apps that you can get for your cell phone that are sound pressure level meters, SPL meters, and you can experiment with that. Download one of those and put it in your listening position. Start turning your speakers up, and then whenever you see that start to hit, actually the more magic number would be 85 decibels. And if you hit, it's going to be pretty loud. The cool thing is that it's not loud enough for physical damage to your ears. 90 decibels plus, so above 90 decibels, that's damaging. Now, you can damage your ears if you sit and listen to 80 or 85 decibels for 12 hours straight, right? But typically we're not going to do that. We're going to take a lot of breaks, and you'll intermittently play it that loud. You'll be surprised at how loud it is, but once you get used to it, it's not too loud. But I would highly recommend using an app for that. Because there's a point of no return. The balances tend to blur at high levels. Everything sounds great when it's loud. You think that, okay, you can have a mix super loud, you mix it, sounds great, then you're done. No, it doesn't really work that way, because when you're listening to lower levels, the balances can be way off. And that just has to do with what the air naturally does to sound. So the environment plays a big part of that. And we can't control the environment that people listen to our music in. You can basically count on the fact that it's going to be non-ideal. It's not going to be a perfectly set up situation for playback. If you can at all, listening to multiple monitors. And I kind of mentioned that before. If you have a main set of speakers, use those. If you have a secondary set of speakers, you can do that. A lot of studios have little boom boxes, or like a little CD clock radio or something. And you'll render a mix and you'll put it on that system, or you'll take it into the car. A lot of mixers do that. I still do that. You know your car system really, really well, especially those of us that commute. You listen to music a lot. You know what to expect, and you know what your favorite mixes from your favorite engineers sound like. And it's a great place to review a mix. Earbuds, the little super cheap earbuds that you know consumers are listening on. You use those for sure. And then mono, and that's easy to do in certain workstations. Reaper has a button on the master fader to flip the mix to mono. It's a very helpful listening and mixing technique, and those are techniques we'll go over later. Other workstations like Pro Tools don't have that function, so you have to have a separate plugin which will collapse the stereo spectrum to mono. And that is the end of our monitoring presentation. So I hope that helps you, gives you perspective on how to listen critically to music in a mixing situation. And I hope you evaluate your particular setup at your home studio and set it up properly for your mixing and listening enjoyment.